Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Breastfeeding Stories. My name is Tanya Wills. I am the owner and founder of Manhattan Birth, where we provide heartfelt, down-to-earth, no purple crystals, childbirth preparation, postnatal support, and midwifery care to families in New York City or wherever you are sitting tonight. We're very, very glad that you're here. Tonight is our totally free webinar series, which we do every 6 weeks. And we've had two others. The first one that we did was birth stories, and the second one was postpartum stories. You can see the recordings of both of those on our YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and you search for Manhattan Birth, you'll find us. You can see how my lighting and my makeup gets better. Tonight we're doing breastfeeding stories. So if you have an idea for a webinar like this and something that you would like to hear, some stories from some new parents about their experience giving birth or in the postnatal period or anything else that we can provide for you, we are very, very eager to do so. So Sarah, I'm just gonna ask you right now if you could just look up what our next topic is so I can tell people because I don't remember, not surprisingly. All right, so before we get started, and just to give you a warning, Katie, your story is going to be first, if that's okay. And in a minute, I'll unmute you and introduce you and everything, so don't worry. Our agenda for tonight is we have two breastfeeding stories that will each be 15 or 20 minutes, and then we have a little breastfeeding primer, and we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So that's our plan. If you would like to, okay, I just found out what our next webinar is going to be. It's going to be on June 12th, and it's going to be on high-risk pregnancy and birth. So if you know anybody that could benefit from hearing stories of moms that gave birth from a high-risk pregnancy, we're going to have some terrific stories to share with you. So okay, so that is the plan for tonight, just so that way you can kind of get used to using what you have. If you can look in your little blue box there, and if you see the raise hand, do you see the way you can raise your hand? Yeah, so let's just see who's here tonight. I think it would be very interesting. Oh, Sarah just raised her hand. I guess you can. Testing it out. So let's see if by a raise of hands, how many people are here tonight who are expecting a baby? Raise your hand if you're expecting a baby or pregnant right now. Oh, or raise your real hand. That's very good. You can do that too. Okay, I see some real hands. I see some computer hands. Fantastic. And anybody here who has a new baby that they are breastfeeding that's here tonight, could you raise you can raise your virtual hand or your actual hand. I see some actual hands and some virtual hands, great. And then, of course, last but not least, we always ask to see if we have other interested parties here, including birth professionals. So if you're a birth professional, you're tuning in to just sort of see what folks are saying, we'd love to see your hand, and you are welcome here as well, because we have the best birth community in the world. So we're very glad that you're here. Okay, if you didn't raise your hand, you're welcome anyway. If you just abstained, that's okay. We're glad. Okay, so we're going to start out with our stories. So Katie, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. Here I go.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, you unmuted yourself. That's perfect. Okay, so I'm just going to give Katie a little primer on I keep saying primer tonight. This is primer stories, apparently. I'm going to give her some instructions on how to tell her story, which she already knows from email, but just as a repeat, everyone here is dying to hear from you. We'd love to hear how old your baby is and how long you've been at this breastfeeding thing. We'd love to hear a little bit about your birth, but keep that a little short, you know, not the whole story, just basically where you had your baby and kind of how it went. And then how your breastfeeding journey began. What were the ups? What were the downs? What were the things that were easier than you thought they were going to be? What were the things that were harder than you thought that they were going to be? What kinds of things helped? What kinds of things didn't help? And of course, we'd love your gems of advice for anybody who is listening. It's always great to hear when somebody who's experienced can say, this is my advice. I've just been there. So I know Katie's going to have a lot of great things to say because Katie, how old is your baby? Remind me.
He is 8 weeks, just in a couple of days.
fresh out of the chute. I'm so excited. That's so great. Okay, Katie, so what I usually do is I'm just going to let you talk. And if you have questions as she goes along, just make a note or you can write it in the chat. I'll also open it up after Katie is done talking, so you can just, openly ask questions if you want. But I'm just going to let you talk, Katie. And then at about 15 minutes, I do set my timer. I'll give you a gentle nudge that there's 5 more minutes left, okay?
Sure.
So we can sort of stay on time and not keep people forever. Sound good?
Sound good. Yeah.
Okay, and I'm going to mute myself so that way my picture doesn't come up, okay?
Can you see me?
Yeah.
You can. Oh my goodness. Okay.
You look gorgeous.
Wow. I didn't quite realize I was going to be on screen. I might have made slightly more effort. It's like, okay.
Just go like this. Go like that. You look great. That's great. Okay, I'm going to mute myself because that way the screen will go big on you, okay?
Okay, cool.
See you in a bit.
All right. Thank you. Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Katie. As I just said to Tanya, my baby is 8 weeks old. You can probably hear him. I'm hoping my husband might shut the bedroom door in a second so that you can't hear him quite so much. So I gave birth at Mount Sinai West in the birthing centre, which apparently makes me some sort of unicorn because it seems like it's pretty hard to get into, but yeah, we did without any problems in the end, so that was great. But just a bit of background before the birth, because I had lots of great plans for how I was going to be knowledgeable about breastfeeding before I had a baby. So I was going to finish work at 38 weeks and I was going to go to a La Leche meeting. I was going to read The Womanly Art of Breastfeeding. I was going to do this properly. And so on my last day of work, I started to feel some slightly suspicious kind of period pains. And I thought, oh no, I need my 2 weeks. I need my 2 weeks. I need to prepare for this. But actually, yes, that was me going into labor. So the baby totally gate crashed my maternity leave, cramped my maternity leave realness. So yeah, and in terms of the birth, it was the birth that I wanted, I guess. It was, I went to Tanya's classes and, got a really good idea there for what I wanted, so unmedicated and in the birthing center. And thankfully it all went to plan. It was a heck of a lot tougher than I ever realized it might be, but I feel like we were pretty prepared. In terms of, so with breastfeeding, the reason I wanted to be really up on it was that some of the other girls in my family had real problems at the start. And through Tanya's classes and things, I started to realize that, maybe if they'd had a bit more support, they might have not had those problems or just a bit more knowledge up front. But yeah, it wasn't meant to be. So we had to go into this a little blind, but with some knowledge, anything gleaned from the internet at that stage. So basically after the birth, I immediately had the skin to skin, which is apparently so important. So I had the baby on me, and he was, sort of recovering a little from the birth. He didn't really latch at that point. So I was, a little concerned because basically we did have skin to skin, but it got interrupted because of issues with my placenta. I had to have something called a manual removal, which is to be avoided if possible. So he was kind of, my husband did skin to skin, which was good for him. And I think he really appreciated that. But it meant that we didn't get the perfect start on breastfeeding, but as it turned out, it wasn't a huge issue. And I think I'd been so concerned about that, but even just a bit of skin to skin was enough. But I'll go on and, you can see how it played out basically. So he hadn't latched and he hadn't really fed. And he was born about 7:30 p.m. So we were, and I labored for, I don't know actually how many hours. I haven't actually counted them, but it started Thursday morning, early hours, and finished Friday evening. So it felt like a long time. I was pretty tired by that stage. So at some point in the birthing center, they did take him away for a couple of hours. So I was, but by the time I got to feed him, I was kind of like, okay, this has really got to work. And of course didn't particularly work very well. And so quite soon I saw a lactation consultant, which was great. Somebody gave me a tip before I gave birth, which was, if you want to see a lactation consultant in the hospital, just cry. I didn't actually have to resort to that, but I thought it was quite good advice if you're struggling. Apparently no one can turn down a sobbing postpartum woman. So that's something to bear in mind. But they were actually pretty good in the hospital, the lactation consultants we saw. So I saw one to start with, and she gave me, she just sort of went over the different holds, which we'd gone over in the last birthing class anyway, but it was just, that was quite helpful. And some of the nurses were quite interesting there. Some were really supportive and great and gave me great tips. Another one, she sort of was grabbing my boob and trying to shove it in his face as he was screaming. And it was just like, I'm pretty sure that from what I have learned in one class, that's not, that his tongue is like on the roof of his mouth where he can't latch. And, so it was a mixed bag, but generally pretty supportive. We had a slight complication, which was that he was jaundiced, so had to stay in hospital for about 3 days in the nursery and under lights, which means it makes it a little difficult with the breastfeeding, because I couldn't always be there on site. I was there for 2 days, but then I no longer had a room available, so I then had to go to and fro to the hospital. So he did have a bottle in those early days, but the hospital gave me a pump, so I got going on that pretty early on, which was absolutely key, I think. And it meant that I never had an issue with supply, even when he was kind of not latching that well. The issue with the latching was essentially that he was just sleepy the whole time. So it was just always this kind of struggle to get him to wake up enough to feed. And we tried many things, the sort of gentle tickling his feet and various parts of his body, trying to get him to wake up, damp cloths on him. And then one of the nurses had something that she referred to as the Simba hold, essentially just holding the baby up by its armpits, dangling a little. They don't like it. Let's be clear on that. And that, to some extent, that kind of woke him up. So I also saw another lactation consultant while I was there, just to kind of say, okay, can you look at the latch and see, is this okay? It feels reasonably okay, not perfect, but they gave us a bit of support on that. And we took him home after 3 days. And of course we got back home and it was, oh my God, we have a baby in the house. So how are we going to feed it? So there was a little, just a little concern about that. But it really kind of, it went from there. So obviously getting home, pressure's on you then. There's nobody you can turn to and say, what can I do? But we got on this cycle of, as recommended, I think, and Tanya particularly emphasized the need to wake them up, don't just let them go and sleep as long as, and he would have slept for much longer than we allowed him to. He was always very sleepy when we woke him up. So we did that like every 3 hours at night, and every 2 hours during the day, which was kind of a joke because he was supposed, he would take like an hour to feed at least. And then there would be lots of sort of screeching in between. And then he might sleep for about 20 minutes and then we'd be back again. So it was, in terms of like challenges, I guess it was exhausting at night because we were kind of breaking his sleep cycle, I guess, all the time. So he was never in a good mood. He was always kind of like, oh God, you're making me do this again. And everything was a big performance. So we'd have to change him to wake him up. I'd get him on one side, he'd sort of latch, unlatch. But he was getting enough overall. That's kind of my message, is that it was a big performance, kind of keeping him awake. But we went to the pediatrician, a couple of times, and he was weighed, and they were pleased. He is gaining. So I think our confidence was low that this was actually working, but it seemed that he was getting enough. And of course, we were counting the diapers and stuff, and he was fine on that front. But you kind of think, how can you get enough when you're not really, this is, and each feed would take a good 45 minutes, possibly longer. And there were, in terms of other challenges, there were some painful latches, where you're sort of like, is this a baby or a piranha. He really, you know, just very uncomfortable. But it was obvious that it was wrong. So it's like, okay, let's start again, which he loved, obviously being latched and unlatched constantly. But it just seemed worth it to try to get that right. My wrist pretty hurt quite a lot after a while of sort of supporting him, but that just resolved on its own. I think we just improved the position a little. Other challenges were probably I guess the main one, I think my husband would say, was the lure of Dr. Google. So to go on and solve all these various breastfeeding issues, and I would always, you know, look up, why is he not da, 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 da. And I just got so much confusing information that it was banned. You know, it was like, okay, you can't go on Google and look up the stuff, and you know, find your trusted websites. So that's essentially what we did, and our doula helped us a bit with that. You know, like where to go to and choose your sites, but don't just constantly look at different ones, because it's baffling, the amount of information, and nothing agrees with anything else. It depends what their philosophy is. It might just be plain wrong, you know. So that would be my advice, and just the classic ones like Kelly Mum was great for the breastfeeding stuff. There have been kind of Tanya was asking me about the challenges, really. So that's I'm just focusing on that at the moment rather than the positives, which we'll come to. But just the only other one was really this sort of fussiness from the baby. And I think as time went on, we've just had to kind of ride that out. So you get this classic witching hour, which I swear nobody tells you about. I went to all of my family afterwards, and I was like, he screams from like 6 to 11 p.m. Why didn't you kind of talk to me about this? And he latches and unlatches and, you know, fusses constantly. And they were like, oh yeah, that does ring a bell, actually. Yeah, my baby did that. Yeah, I was like, but people forget it, because of course it doesn't last forever, we're telling ourselves. So that's a little challenging with feeding, because you immediately assume that they're not getting enough, and of course that's not really the case, or at least they're building your supply, or, you know. So it's kind of, I think it's having that trust that your body is responding, even though it seems like the baby is unhappy, but it's just kind of general fussiness, and we're finding it like 8 weeks that is improving a bit, or at least it's shifting to earlier in the evening. It's no longer like up till midnight, so that's positive. In terms of another question that we kind of talked about was what was easy, and I think, I mean, breastfeeding in those early days, I think some people do find it easy. I wouldn't say that I found it easy, but it was, I think it was reassuring to know that everybody had challenges in the early days that I spoke to, and that they kind of came through them. And a lot of people said to me, oh, you know, 4 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever. And of course that felt like a lifetime at that stage, but it kind of proved to be the case. So at least for us. So it just kind of clicked without me really noticing. I was just around the 4 week mark. I remember my sister called me on FaceTime, and I was trying to feed Gus at the time, and I was like, oh, I'll just answer that. And I suddenly thought, God, I've got enough hands finally to do more than one thing. Because before that, it was like both my hands, my husband helping as well. And, you know, but suddenly it became, oh, okay, well, actually, no, this is coming together. And it seemed like it took that early education, that the help from the lactation consultants. And I should also say our doula was really helpful as well with, you know, with correcting my positioning and making sure that we were properly sort of tummy to tummy, because I had him maybe in a slightly awkward position, so he couldn't get there properly. But yeah, it was that initial knowledge, but also this just patience to some extent, and just giving it time, because I guess it's like any skill. You're learning it, the baby's learning it, and the baby's not particularly strong, you know, especially if they're born earlier, and it just took a little while to get to that stage. And I think for my baby, he just has become more and more alert, and just kind of able to kind of stay awake and feed properly. So now, where night times before we would be awake, I mean, maybe for 2 hours for each feeding, so it was practically he would go to sleep and we'd be needing to wake him again. Now he will literally just wake up. At the moment it's once or twice a night he'll wake up. I'll just pick him up into bed and feed him for probably 20 minutes, super efficient, and then he's done and he's happy to go back to bed. So it kind of just happened. I guess it was a gradual thing, but suddenly we just sort of thought, oh, this just got easier. We stopped having to do a big workup to do this, and it's so nice to be able to do it now. I think that's, for me, that's the main thing. I desperately wanted to be able to do it. I kind of thought, I've known people have struggles with this, so maybe it will be difficult for me as well. And there was that build up, but I think if your expectations are sort of realistic, that it's going to be something that you work at. And I think some people it is a lot easier. Some people the baby just gets it quickly, but my kind of message, I guess, would be if they don't, then it really is worth persevering. And once you get there, it's such a nice thing. Like now when I'm feeding him, I look down and he kind of looks up at me, and you just have that, it's a lovely experience. So I guess that's my story. If there's any other questions, then happy to answer.
Katie, you did it before the 5-minute warning.
Oh.
You had 5 seconds to go. So you're amazing.
Woohoo!
So anyway, guys, that was everything you need to know about breastfeeding, basically. Wasn't that right on point? That was so amazing. Does anybody have a question right now for Katie? And there's going to be more opportunities to ask questions, but you can either raise your hand or chat me or unmute yourself and start talking if you have a question. Here's a question. Oh, fantastic. Here's the question from Alex. Hello, thank you for your story. I had a question. I thought you should never wake up a sleeping baby. Why did you need to wake him up and feed him? What a great question. Katie, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, you should definitely follow up, Tanya, because it was your advice originally. Yeah. So this, Alex, this was, it is generally in those early days where I think you're always taught, of course a baby will wake up when it's hungry, but newborns don't necessarily. And for my baby particularly, he was born at I think he was 6'12", so he was on the smaller side. So the pediatrician as well was keen that he gained weight as quickly as possible. And if I left it to him, he probably would have fed, at least at night, maybe every 4 hours. And it just wasn't often enough for him to get enough calories in. I think they're just sort of drowsier and it does go completely against all your instincts, which are, oh my God, he's finally asleep, I really want to leave him. But we just knew, the scales would tell if we did that. So yeah, I mean, Tanya, I don't know what from your
just to add, especially in your case, because Gus had jaundice. So for anybody here who is pregnant or has a new baby or anything like that, jaundice makes babies sleepy, okay? Makes them extra sleepy. And the thing that pushes the jaundice out so you can get them out from under the lights and bring them home and just sort of get on with things is peeing and pooping, right? So we really need them to wake up. So sometimes if we just let a baby with jaundice sleep, what can happen is they actually get more jaundice, and their blood sugar goes lower and their weight goes lower, and it just sort of starts to spiral in the wrong direction. So for a brand spanking new newborn, before you have a milk supply that's been established, I always recommend that people wake up their babies every 2 to 3 hours to feed them until your milk has come in and the baby's weight starts to go on the upswing. As a lactation consultant, I don't even think I can count how many people per year call me to come and help them with a baby that has lost too much weight simply because nobody told them to wake up the baby. They just let the baby decide. So I would definitely say that once your breastfeeding has been established and the baby's weight gain is on the upswing and they're doing well and you know that everything is successful, by all means, let your baby sleep. But in those very early days while you're establishing the breastfeeding, wake up the baby, feed the baby, give them some good blood sugar so they can learn better. So that's what I would say. And especially if your baby has jaundice. Cool. Great question. So glad you asked it. Any other questions right now for Katie, or I'm going to do a little bit more talking on breastfeeding later, but I'm looking for raised hands, or you can just unmute yourself and start talking if you like. Okay. For now, what I got from you, Katie, was that it takes patience and it takes time, and it's just it was sort of figuring it out, like one step at a time. And the baby gave you some stuff, and then you kind of kept going, and you asked advice, and you checked with resources, and you found the right resources, and you just sort of kept going. So that's great to hear. And it's great to hear that it wasn't like he just latched on because I had him naturally.
Yeah, if only.
Right? I think people have that, there's sort of a myth that if your birth is just right, if your birth is totally perfect, then the breastfeeding will be totally perfect. And we know that the breastfeeding is perfect when it's perfect. You know what I mean? And there's all this stuff about what's associated, but there's no direct correlation. So anyway, that was really, really helpful for us to hear all those challenges. And of course, you're still breastfeeding Gus, right? And he's gaining, he's doing great.
Oh, yeah, all good. And now it's so easy. It's just, I really had to think of what it was like then, because it feels like another lifetime ago. It really does. It just changed so much, So yeah, still going strong.
And one more thing too is that really for a lot of people who breastfeed, that's what we're after, right? Is the idea that we can just like painlessly lift our shirts and pop the baby on and then move on with life, So you don't have to wash a lot of dishes and you don't have to do a lot of thinking about it. And once you get it, that is where it's headed. And that's my desire for every breastfeeding person out there. So thank you, Katie. Katie, I'm going to mute you. Maybe you'll mute yourself. Katie will hopefully stand by unless her baby needs her. There might be questions later, but we'll do our best. Oh, there was one more question. Hi, Katie mentioned that her postpartum doula supported her during the initial breastfeeding struggles. Would you recommend that your doula also be a certified lactation consultant, or are most postpartum doulas trained to support you in the process? I think that's a question for me. So here's what I would think. I think that where doulas are concerned, their training in breastfeeding, it has a wide range, right? Just as it will for any nurse who takes care of you. We're going to talk about this when I talk about it a little bit later. And certainly for any doctor or midwife who comes your way, or any pediatrician that comes your way. There is a wide range of the way that people are trained and how they're experienced. So I would recommend that you ask your doula, how do you help people with breastfeeding? And see what they say. Do they say, yeah, that's one of my main things? Or even your birth doula might have. I know lots of birth doulas. I know Sarah does this, where she has 2 postnatal visits, and one of them might be in the hospital. Like she might come after the birth right in the hospital if you're having trouble, in case you can't get a nurse, or in case you're not crying enough for the lactation consultant to come. So that was a great tip, Katie. So some birth doulas even will have a lot of experience with that. And of course, some postpartum doulas will as well. Other doulas, they sort of say, well, I can help you troubleshoot and I can help you get an expert, right? So I don't necessarily think that it has to be all in one package, but I would say don't assume that a doula is going to be able to solve all of your breastfeeding problems. They should be knowledgeable enough to help you, and they should be knowledgeable enough to know when your issues that you're having are over their head and when you really do need like a lactation consultant to come in. There are very few doulas that are IBCLCs and doulas. So we'll talk about that in a little while, but I wouldn't go with credential. I would ask the doula in the interview about it and then listen to her answer and see how you feel about it. Katie, was your doula did she also have a lactation credential?
No, she was our birth doula, and because she hadn't managed to complete her prenatal visits, she gave us like the postnatal. It was Sophia, Sophia O'Shaughnessy.
Yeah.
And she was great. She didn't have credentials as such, I don't think, but she was able to just give a few tips. And I think she always said to us, if you've if any issue, if you would have any issues that would persist, you'd see a lactation consultant. But she was just tinkering, I think, and she was very good at doing that. So
yeah, I know Sophia really well, and she's a great example. I don't think that she has a lactation credential, but she definitely is very experienced in helping her clients breastfeed and seeing lots of people and what normal breastfeeding is. So taking a few day course doesn't necessarily give you that as much as like real life experience does. She certainly has that. So I hope that answers your question. Okay, so thanks, Katie. We're going to move on to Carly. Carly, we missed Ezra. I saw he was here. Wait, let me unmute you. Hold on. Oh boy, Tanya, come
on. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
Hi. Yes, Ezra was here, but he usually goes to sleep by about 7:15 or 7:30, so he was getting whiny. So hopefully you saw him for a second. My husband's here, so do you want to just come stick your head in the frame, honey?
Hi.
Hi.
So he's gonna listen in.
Fantastic. So Carly, I haven't seen you in a few weeks. It's great to see you. You look great.
Thank you.
Carly, tell us how old Ezra is.
So Ezra is 5 months old.
Oh my gosh.
I know, and he's a giant baby. People always ask me, they're like, "Oh, how old's your baby? Like 9 months?" I'm like, "No, he's just a giant. He's just a really big kid." But yeah, he's doing great.
Great. It's great to hear it. Well, Carly, I know a little bit about your story because we were working together we have an online new mothers program called Mother Mentoring, and Carly was in that program, so we got to know each other pretty well. And she has a terrific complicated breastfeeding story to tell us. You are breastfeeding Ezra still, right?
Yes.
And you've gone back to work.
Yes.
So fantastic. So I think you heard everything that I told Katie, but we'd love to hear a little bit about your birth, which I know was a little bit different, and a little bit about how you got started breastfeeding, what challenges presented, how you made it through to become the breastfeeder that you are today. So I'm going to mute myself so everybody can hear you.
Great. Well, hi everyone. I'm glad to have this opportunity. I was making some notes of what I wanted to say, and I was thinking how cathartic it is to just kind of like be able to share and kind of say everything. So I'm going to give a little bit of context, just so it kind of helps you think of like my frame of mind. So my husband and it took us 5.5 years to get pregnant, and we had 3 miscarriages. We went to 3 different fertility clinics. We did 3 rounds of IVF. So already our story was complicated. And, I was really lucky. I had a pretty uneventful pregnancy other than barfing a lot and being really sick until like week 25. But nothing crazy eventful with my pregnancy. I did at 39.5 weeks, my baby decided to turn himself breech, which was really like crazy. My doctor had to pick her jaw up off the floor when she saw that. She didn't know what to say. So they turned him back, and then we kind of waited for things to happen, and then they didn't, and so we decided to be induced. And I was in the camp of wanting to do all natural, but with him turning himself and also being kind of larger and me being past my due dates, like it just made sense to try to be induced and to let that process go. And but then my water broke, so I ended up I was induced. What happened was when they turned him back, he didn't quite get into the right position. And so I labored for 24 hours, but I never got past 4 centimeters, despite all of the things, all of the positions and all of the, I was on Pitocin and I was on, I had to do a cervical ripener and all of these different things. So we ended up doing a C-section. And just for those who haven't had a baby, I think it's really important that you give yourself permission to be okay with a C-section, because my sister had, she was convinced that she was going to have her baby all natural, her first baby. And then she ended up having a C-section, and that baby is now 12 years old. And my sister, I feel like, is still like kind of mad that she had a C-section. And I just feel like that's a little, unfortunate that she still feels that way. And I think that's just because she wasn't mentally prepared. So, so that's my plug for that. So I ended up having a C-section, but I felt very, like, I had great communication with my doctor. I loved my doctor. I felt like she was in my corner. It was a little bit scary, but, I had my husband there, and, things were great. And so I came out of the recovery room, and I was like, I'm going to have this beautiful breastfeeding story. I've read my books. I've done my course. I've talked to people. I've, done, it's just going to be amazing. And I was in the recovery room, and I could hardly keep my eyes open. I just felt so sleepy and dizzy. And then they bring my baby in, and I'm like, just barely stapled together. And they're like, all right, let's breastfeed your baby. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can barely hold him. He doesn't open his mouth. And then when he does, he doesn't suck. And I'm like, it's so funny, because you take this class and you read the book, and you do all these things, and you're like, okay, I'm ready. And then they put this baby in your arms, and you're like, oh my gosh, what do I do? You're like, but what do you actually do? It's just like, I don't know. It's hard to describe until the baby's there, and you're like, oh, so now I have to feed you with my body. It's just so strange. So it was a little rough at first, because he never sucked at first. And I was still, like, very dizzy. I had low blood pressure. I'd lost a lot of blood. And so we spent about 15 minutes trying to kind of make it work, and it didn't really. And so they took him into the nursery for a little bit. My husband was with him the whole time, so that made me feel really safe and secure. And then I spent another 6 hours in the recovery room, because I wasn't getting, my vitals weren't getting back. And so, that was a little bit of a bummer. I still didn't quite get that experience that I wanted. And then I was in the hospital for 3 days, because I had a C-section. So I was, recovering from major surgery, and the baby just had such a hard time latching. And then when he was like glomming on, almost like he was biting, but obviously he doesn't have teeth. And it was just like, I didn't know what to do. I was like, well, what the heck do I do here? So I tried to get a lactation consultant to come in as much as I could. I think the second time a lactation consultant came in, the first time we tried a shield, and we got him to at least kind of suck a little bit. And I did a little bit of hand expressing. So I had at least a little bit of what's that stuff called? The first part, the stuff that comes out when you breastfeed.
Colostrum.
Yes, colostrum.
I'm here for you, Carly. I'm here for you.
So I had a little bit of that, but it's still like he wasn't really getting anything from me on his own. So the second time I had a lactation consultant come in, she was like, I wonder if he has a tongue tie. And one of my really good friends, her baby had a tongue tie, and they didn't know about it until the baby was 6 weeks old. And by that time, they'd had such a horrible experience that the baby had associated the position and the feel of breastfeeding with, like, pain, and he wouldn't do it. He wouldn't, and he never did again. And so, which was really sad for her. She really wanted to have that experience. But I think because of that, the small silver lining is that I knew what a tongue tie was and a lip tie. And so when the lactation consultant said that, I was like on that. I was like, all right, I'm going to talk to the pediatrician when she's in here. And I even looked in his mouth, and I could see it. Like, it was such a strong tongue tie that it was like all the way to the end of his tongue. And
Carly, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Just for the benefit of everybody, in case they don't know what a tongue tie is, do you want to explain it?
Yeah. So underneath your tongue, you have a little bit of tissue that kind of connects your tongue and your to the bottom of your gums. Most babies that goes away as they develop in the womb further, but for some babies it takes a little bit longer, and it can be it can be prohibitive for them to suck because they can't get their tongue underneath to really get the sucking motion. It's a very simple procedure. They just snip the tissue and it's done. But it can be prohibitive. For some people, it's not though, and their baby can suck with the tongue tie. So that's fine. He also had a lip tie where in his top lip, there was that connective tissue again. And that kind of made it hard for him to get his lip up and over the top of my nipple. So between the two of those, it just was, it was rough, and we just never got a really good latch. He would always open up wide, so we at least had that. Finally, by the time I left the hospital, and I saw a lactation consultant 5 times, by the time we left the hospital, we were able to feed the baby with a nipple shield and using the supplement where you have like a little tube and you've got formula that's helping to feed the baby. And I think about it now, and it's funny now, but at the time it was extremely stressful. My husband was like on the side, like holding the tube and like making sure the formula was like coming in. And I'm like holding the baby and like trying to figure out how you hold the baby and get the baby on and like trying to get his mouth. And then the lactation consultant is in there trying to like get, helping getting his lips. And so it's like 3 of us to get this baby fed, and then they're like, all right, now you can go home. And I'm like, okay, like, how am I supposed to do this on my own? And we still had to do that for a few days. The day after we got home from the hospital, we went to a pediatric ENT and got the lip tie and the tongue tie fixed. Like I said, it was a very simple procedure. My sister was there. She was staying with me to help me take care of the baby. And I'm so glad she was there. She's had 5 kids, so she's had a lot, she's had kids bleed all over her and gone to the emergency room and all that stuff. I'm so glad she was there because anytime there's any kind of something in a kid's mouth or a person's, anything in their face or their mouth, there's always a lot of blood. And so you see your like 5-day-old baby and there's like blood and you're just like, oh, it was rough. My husband he was like in the other room. He can't do blood. But my sister was like, okay, we got this. And I'm like, like crying and it really, like, the second that they stopped, like the doctor put his hands out of the baby's mouth, within 10 seconds, Ezra stopped crying. He was fine, but I didn't stop crying. So it was much rougher on me. So even after we got the tongue tie fixed, it still took a little bit for him to figure out how to still suck. He was still like chomping. And so if I didn't have that nipple shield, oh man, it just hurts so bad. And because I wasn't getting strong suction from him, I didn't have enough milk for him. By this time, he's already 6 days old and my milk supply hasn't kept up with it. So I'm having to supplement with formula and I'm nervous because I'm like, oh my gosh, formula is supposed to be like the devil. And it's going to mess with my supply and it's going to ruin my baby's gut. And he's going to, like all of the weird stuff that you hear. So that was stressful, which a lot of that stuff isn't true, by the way. And he would fall asleep a lot when we would finally get a good latch and it seemed like things were working. And then he'd fall asleep in like a few minutes. And it was like, we worked so hard and now you're falling asleep. And then, so that was rough. And then, there were plenty of times where I would say up until 3 or 4 weeks in where it was really rough. And I thought, I just want to quit. Like, this is not worth it. I know that some people have it rough and some people it works for. And maybe I'm just one of those people that it's just really rough and we just can't do it. And I would always ask myself, can I do one more feeding? And I was like, yeah, okay, I can do one more and then I'll decide. And I just went from one feeding to one feeding. I just didn't worry past, what the next feeding was. So I called the hospital support line several times. They have they call it a warm line because they aren't necessarily always on the line, but it's basically they'll call you back within minutes. My sister also, bless her heart, she had 5 children. But it had been, her youngest was like 6 or 7. So it'd been a while since she had breastfed a baby. And I think she was thinking of like how babies are when they're older. And Ezra would cluster feed a lot, which means, you know, I would feed him, and then 10 minutes later he would act like he was hungry again, and I'd be like, oh my gosh, I don't have enough milk, or he's not eating, or I'm not a good enough mother, or like, all, you know, all of this stuff. And my sister's telling me like, well, you have to teach him good habits. He can't just eat whenever he wants. And I realized that, and I didn't realize this until after she left, that like, it's different when they're really little, when they're really young babies, when it's those first few weeks, it's different. Maybe if you have a 9-month-old and they are always trying to latch and it's kind of getting in the way of you taking care of other kids or other things, you know, and they've just got a big, like sucking, they always want to suck. Well, then give them a pacifier and set some boundaries. But that's totally different with like a 5-day-old baby. So she had good intentions, but it certainly kind of made me a little crazy. I just felt like he wanted to suck all of the time. And I didn't anticipate that. I didn't know that babies would do that. I didn't know what cluster feeding was. And so I was like, I just fed you and now you want to eat again? Like there's something wrong with me. And then of course I'm still getting my milk supply in because I just didn't have good latching and sucking. So I had a consultant come over, and, you know, I kind of cried, and she like, basically the best thing that she did for me was giving me a pep talk and being like, you are working hard, you're doing the best that you can, just keep working. And my milk came in and things started to really kind of come together. And I started reaching out and doing a lot more support. So for instance, calling the hospital line. I went to this mother mentoring group. That was right around the time I went to do this mother mentoring. I went to a support group for breastfeeding, which is usually led by a lactation consultant. There's usually only a few people. The times that I went, there were only 2 people. So it was one lactation consultant and 2 people, and you pay like $20 or something. And then they weigh the baby and they'll kind of watch you breastfeed and give you some tips. That was great. So I was tracking like crazy on my phone, and you know, by the time we got to 8 weeks, I felt really great. I felt like he had gained steady weight, and he never had bad weight gain. I think it just was more like, you know, it was probably more me. But by the time we got to 8 weeks, I was like, okay, I can see now why people say that they enjoy it. And now here I am, you know, at 5 months, and I went back to work. And I think because I understood the principles of supply and how to manage my supply, I'm still able to have my baby 100% fed on breast milk. When I'm home, he's breastfed, and when I'm not home, he eats pumped milk. And on the weekends, he's only breastfed. And unless we're going on a date or something, you know, but and that is so special to me, to be able to come home and to have that time with him when I've been gone all day. And I can tell that he enjoys it too. The second I come home, he wants to nurse. And even if he's just eaten, you know, and so I can tell that that's really special to him too. So that's a little bit of my story. And should we see if anybody has any questions?
Carly, you have 17 seconds before my gentle nudge. You guys are amazing. I swear. That's so great. Okay, it's going to go off. Let me make it shush. Thank you, Carly. What a great story. It's really great to hear how you came through all of that, and how like it was really, really bumpy in the beginning, and you kind of got pointed in one direction and another direction, and then you got some advice from somebody that you loved that you realized wasn't the right advice. And so you listened to your guts, which is a big, big deal. And, you know, I say it a lot, but there's a lot of people that mean well in the system and in our lives that really ultimately are undermining us. And so good for you for following your guts. And I'm sure your sister's going to have lots of, I mean, she helped you a lot with the bloody mouth. So that was really good.
Totally.
We can be grateful for some things and leave the rest.
Exactly. She helped me tremendously. That one thing was maybe less helpful.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's that whole thing about like, like what you were saying about how like, oh, if I give the baby formula, then I'll never have enough milk. And, you know, well, also if your baby's not latching and he doesn't get fed, then he'll never feed. And then you'll really never have enough milk. So it's complex in terms of when formula is appropriate. And it really did help you in your situation. So you had a really good reason for giving it. You weren't just like, oh, I don't believe in myself, so let me give the baby formula. It was like, you could see that your baby was not feeding well. So that was really, really terrific. And I think that he learned better because you fed him. I really, really believe that. So it's great that you had somebody giving you good advice as far as that goes. Okay, so we are going to take questions for Carly, who also just like taught a whole class on tongue tie and supply and demand and and nipple shields. If you have a question, you can chat me in the box, or you can raise your hand, or you can just unmute yourself and start talking.
I have a question.
Hi, Tatiana.
Hi, Carly. I loved your story, and you know, it's very similar to mine actually. My baby's almost 4 weeks old now, and we're still ironing out lots of feeding kinks, but I want to be primarily breastfeeding, but the latch in the beginning didn't work. She's like a big chomper. My nipples were so sore and like bruised and bleeding. Not bleeding, but purple, and yeah. So I couldn't use them for the first few days. So we did have to supplement with formula, and of course I felt completely guilty. We used some bottles, and so I guess my question is, for instance, today, we've been using Nipple Shield. I have the tubing, trying to get her extra breast milk into her system, and then I am still doing some bottles and still pumping, all of the above, to get her fed. My question is, so tonight at like 6 p.m., after she'd been feeding almost all afternoon, I thought I had no more milk because I had just pumped, and you know, she'd been feeding, so I gave her some formula. Should I have fed her still? Should I have just kept on feeding her at the breast, even though I had just pumped, but she was hungry? Like, what do you do in that situation?
You know what, that's a great question. And I actually, I
don't know if this is a question for you or Tanya, but either of you.
Let me tell you what I think just in my experience, and then Tanya can tell you as a professional, so she can correct whatever I say. So it's funny, I was actually pumping the other day at work, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to write down all of the like rules that I have for myself so that the next time I have a baby, I can remember these things. So, you know, one of the things that I found is that when I felt like he was still hungry, even though I had just fed him, and I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? You know what I found is that there's always a little bit of milk still in there. And the more often that you are emptying your breast, the more often that your breast will fill back up. And so what I found is that, so I would feed him normally, you know, like he would eat for a certain amount of time on one side, which by the way, shortens as they get older because they get better at it. So I would feed him normally on one side and then the other side. And then if it seemed like he was still hungry, I would put him back on the other side, because there would be a little bit of milk that had collected from the 10 or 15 minutes that I'd been on the other side. And then if he was still hungry, you know, so I do both sides, and then I'd go back to the other side, and then I'd do that for maybe 10 minutes. And then if he was getting squirmy, I'd put him on the other side, and I just keep going back. So even if it was only like a trickle, at least he was getting something, because at least there was some milk that was collecting in the short 15-minute break between each side, or 10-minute break. And you are doing the best thing for your body, which is signaling it needs to make more milk because it's getting emptied so much. When my milk supply was super low, my lactation consultant recommended that I do power pumping, and I would do it after the baby when I knew he was going to be sleeping for a while. So what you do is you pump for 20 minutes, you are off for 10, pump for 10, off for 10, pump for 10. And that that simulates cluster feeding. So you can do the same thing just yourself. You just keep switching sides. So every 10 or 15 minutes, you keep switching sides until your baby is satiated. So that's what I would do once my milk was, I felt like milk was established.
Mm-hmm. And
That's
then
a good answer, Carly. Tatiana, I just want to say something else, if it's okay. I just wanted to mention, I don't know what you should have done, but I'm glad that your instincts were to feed your baby and therefore you did so. So I just want to really give you like a little cheer for that. So I don't think you did anything wrong. But I think, and by the way, like, I'm not sure what's going on with your supply and with formula, because I don't know your whole situation. So if you felt like she was cluster feeding all afternoon, and maybe you were really doing a lot of that back and forth already, and you just couldn't get her to settle, you thought maybe she's not getting, maybe your baby has been having weight gain issues, I'm not sure. But if she has, then you thought, you know what, let me just give her something extra. We don't have that much of my milk in the fridge. We have formula. I'll give her that, you know, and that would be okay. And it sounds like if you already had done the switch nursing that Carly mentioned, and you have been having weight gain issues, then I would feed her.
Yeah. Well, actually, we're not having weight gain issues, so that's a good thing. But I don't have a lot of breast milk stored up either, just because basically what I've been pumping, she's been eating.
Right.
Sort of like after every feeding, she'll usually eat what I've pumped, which isn't that much.
Yeah. So that's okay. And I would say maybe she's going through a growth spurt. So go ahead and let her cluster feed. But Tatiana, like, as much as you can tolerate, because it sounds like you also have pain, right? So you've got kind of a lot going on.
They're better, but still a little sore.
Okay, good. Well, I think you're okay. It sounds like she's mostly getting your breast milk.
Mostly.
Yeah.
Now mostly. Before, it was, when I was healing, it was a little more formula.
And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I still give my baby formula at least once a week, because I want him to be used to it and not be, you know, because I need to, sometimes he's screaming on the subway and I just can't like pick him up and breastfeeding. So I give him like a couple ounces of formula, or maybe, you know, there's a lot of good reasons to give formula. So that's, I think that's great. I used it. I still use it regularly.
And he still breastfeeds. It didn't like lightning didn't come down and strike your breastfeeding relationship and like, right?
Absolutely.
So it's all relative. So it's like, I think, you know, and I've said this before, like, I mean, I'm a lactation consultant. I love breastfeeding. It's great. It's the best thing for your baby. The breast milk is the best thing, right? But like, I think what has happened is that, like, when I was born, it's no secret, like I'm always very public about this, that I was not breastfed at all. And I actually like don't know a lot of people that were breastfed, like sort of the people that I grew up with. And I think that, you know, there was sort of like a real popularity of formula for a long time. And so now they've done a lot of research on breastfeeding, and sort of the pendulum has swung the other way to sort of encourage people to breastfeed and educate people on how to breastfeed. And it's like we went so far in this direction that it demonized, you know, it makes people feel like they're doing something terrible if they give their baby a bottle of formula, or they give their baby an ounce of formula, or a little formula in the hospital because the baby's under the lights and they have jaundice and they're not making any milk and they think they'll never get them out of there if they don't feed them. So I think that it's important that we keep it in perspective. You know, everything that we teach about breastfeeding, the majority of it, right, is that you want to do as much as you possibly can. And if your baby is coming to the breast regularly, they will continue to come to the breast. So it's when a baby continually is not going to the breast. So if a baby is exclusively bottle fed for a long period of time, then of course they're going to refuse the breast because they're smart. They're so smart, right? So, but you know, if you have a little bump in the road here or whatever, and you don't have any breast milk, and so you give the baby formula, you fed your baby. Onward.
That's what we were doing.
Yeah, onward. Exactly. So I wish that I know a lactation consultant. I can't remember her name, but she has this great little saying that she says, where she says that mothers give birth to, you know, a baby and a placenta and guilt. You know what I mean? So I think that it's very, very tricky. And, you know, you definitely, I think, you know, when your baby is 5 or 6 months and you're really experienced like Carly, Tatiana, you're going to look back on this and be like, oh my God, I didn't even use all that much formula. I made so much milk. She got so much milk, you know, and you'll be feeling really proud of yourself.
Thanks.
Okay. Other questions for Carly? Tanya, are you raising your hand?
Yeah, hi.
Hi, my friend.
How are you?
I'm great.
So yeah, I have a question about bottle feeding. So the few times that we've gone out and left the baby with someone, I have no idea how much milk to give them for the baby. And yeah, how do you know how much, oh, my husband's joining us now.
Hello.
Yeah, how much when you're pumping, like how do you know how much is coming out of your boob when you're breastfeeding? And then when you bottle feed, how much do you know kind of leave for X amount of time?
Okay, so you don't exactly know, so you have to make it up, but there is a way that you can figure out what to make up. So I'm going to tell you right now. How much does your baby weigh?
13 pounds, 2 ounces.
Very good. And how many times a day would you say you feed your baby?
That's a good question. I'd say 5 to 6.
5 to 6 times per day you feed the baby?
Yeah.
Does that mean like in a 24-hour period?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how old's your baby?
He is 9 weeks old.
9 weeks old. Okay. So what I would say, if you're feeding the baby 6 times, your baby probably needs about 30 ounces a day. So that's about 5 ounces per feeding. Most people will feed their baby more frequently than that, like maybe 7 or 8 times a day or even 9 times a day. So it
could be more than that.
Yeah, it might be more than that. You don't even realize it, because I'm thinking,
yeah.
I don't think you're giving your baby 5 ounce feedings. So what generally I would say is for a 13-pound baby, and I would say, guys, once the baby is 12 pounds, they kind of max out in terms of how much they need. So, you know, some babies at 9 weeks will be 12 pounds, some people at babies at 12 weeks or whatever it is, but it's right at 12 pounds that we just sort of like equalize this whole thing until we get food on our team, which is going to be, you know, the recommendation is 6 months, but the truth is some people it's going to be earlier than that and some people it's going to be later than that, because who just wakes up at 6 months and they eat an apple? Nobody. Or applesauce or whatever, right? It's like you woke up on your due date and had a baby. Like, it doesn't work that way. So unless you did, in which case you're special. Tanya, I know you didn't. We're sisters and going past our due dates.
Oh, yeah.
So, so what I would say, oh, look at this baby.
Hi.
Hi,
Say hi, August.
Yeah,
Hey.
I think he's getting plenty of milk. Okay.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
I can see by the cheeks. So what I would say is you take 30 ounces and divide it by the number of feedings. But as a general rule, when a baby is maxed out, you want to offer about 4 ounces. Some babies you're going to find are going to take more like 3.5. And some babies you're going to find are going to take more like 4.5. If you're away for like, you know, 3 or 4 hours or something like that, and there's a feeding right in the middle of it. But I would say leave like a 4-ounce bottle and a couple of ounces extra in case you're late, so you're not leaving anybody hanging without milk.
Okay, because I have the feeling that if you give him more than that, he will just take it from a bottle.
Yeah, give him half. Do paced bottle feeding. If you don't know what that is, we'll cover it in a minute. Do paced bottle feeding. Give him half. Take a pausa. Burp him. Let him settle. Let him know that the milk has gone into his body, and then wait until he's queuing again for more. Now, he may freak out as soon as you take the bottle out, right? He may be like, wait, where's my milk, right? Just use soothing techniques. He's not starving. You just gave him 2 ounces of milk, okay? He's okay. He had at least a little appetizer, and then sort of burp him, change him, let him settle so a few minutes go by, and then he'll start queuing again, and you can give him the rest slowly, okay? And then see how he does then. But you're right, a lot of babies will just suck down whatever you give them in the bottle, so we sort of have to regulate. If he's still really, really hungry at the end of 4 ounces, then offer another ounce.
Okay.
Don't starve that kid. I mean, I don't think you could, though, that little pumpkin.
He's not starving. No, he's not starving.
Sounds like you're doing great.
Thanks.
Okay. More questions for me or Carly or Katie? There's always a lot of breastfeeding questions, right? Allison has a question. I'm going to unmute you if I can.
Hi.
Hi, Allison.
Hi. Thank you, guys. So I currently have a 3-week-old, and I've been exclusively breastfeeding. It's been going well. He's gaining a ton of weight. He's gaining about like 2 ounces a day once it goes down 2, which is incredible. But I've been using the nipple shield since the hospital because I had trouble latching when I was engorged, and was wondering, Carly, because I caught your story, know that you use nipple shields and all your other tools to breastfeed. Is wondering when you started to attempt to wean any of your tools like the nipple shields.
Yeah, so I started doing a little bit less and less of the formula as I felt like my milk was moving and like I could physically feel it. The nipple shield was kind of a funny story, actually. So what I would try to do is let him kind of get a good rhythm going, and then I would try to take the nipple shield away.
There's my cat.
Yeah, there's your cat. Say hi. So I would try to take the nipple shield away, and sometimes it would work and sometimes it wouldn't. So we were kind of on the process of doing that. And then I remember I went to the doctor's office, the pediatrician, and the baby was like screaming. He was like super hungry. I was like, all right, well, I'll feed him. Like, that's fine. And I'd forgotten my nipple shield. And I was like, I remember like my whole body getting hot and just being like, oh my gosh, my baby's gonna starve. And I was like, okay, let's just see what he does, you know, because I tried it for parts. Like I'd done parts of each feed of the last several feedings without it. Like I said, I would go for like maybe a few minutes and then try to take it away and see if he was latching in a way that was tolerable. So then we're at the doctor's office and this happens. And so I'm like, all right, let's just see what happens. Like, babies do this all the time. Maybe he can do it right now. And he did. It was still a little bit painful, but we did it. And then I was like, all right, I'm going to try the next feeding without it. And then over the course of the next day or so, we were doing it without it. And he got better at, I think he learned that when he like does that biting motion, he doesn't really get a lot of milk. So he started learning more and more.
How old was he when you started, or at that point, how old was he when you were?
It was like 2, he was like 2 or 3 weeks, 2.5 weeks, I think. I'm trying to think when that doctor's appointment was. Maybe 3 weeks. 3 weeks, I think, was when I had that doctor's appointment, and I was like, well, so I was trying to do it gradual, but then I kind of had to rip the Band-Aid off, and I feel like I was lucky that it was working, but you know, that's what worked for me. I don't know if Tanya has some ideas for you.
Yeah, I've tried like mid to end feeds to try to take it off and get him to relatch, which he doesn't and gets hysterical, and we have to reapply the nipple. So I've attempted to wean, but haven't had any success yet.
Tanya had a cool way where you like kind of slice.
Yeah, this is sort of like an old school way. And, you know, some people say that you shouldn't do this because like you might slice it. It might be too sharp. But I think like these are silicone breast, like nipple shields. Like they're not sharp. So here's the way that people have done it, which is that they just take like a tiny bit off the top, like they take an X-Acto knife, you know, or a razor blade, and they slice a tiny bit off the top of the nipple shield, and then like that's the shield that they start using, you know, and then maybe a few days later they slice a tiny little hair off again, you know, and they sort of do that until they feel like they can try and bait and switch the baby again. Another thing, Allison, let me ask you, the baby's using a nipple shield because he was having trouble latching in the hospital, and so they said he might do better with it?
He's been using it since the hospital and then wouldn't latch without it.
Okay. So, you know, I'm not there with you, but I would say one thing to try, do your nipples stick out?
No, not not exactly.
Okay, so this could be.
They're not. No, yeah, they're not inverted, but they're not. I mean, they're not as long as the nipple shields, of course. But
yeah. Are they? But like, are they flat or do they stick out a little bit?
yeah, they stick out a little bit.
Okay, so I would say keep trying, right? Like maybe once a day when he wakes up just from a nap, you know, and maybe he's just right next to you on your skin, you know, just let him kind of go there and see. And then I would also suggest that when you latch him, I'm going to try and show you with my really expensive breastfeeding tool, would be like when you latch him, just like, you know, pull your nipple out and like hold it there for him. And then when he comes on, right? You know, with the nipple shield, you've got this thing sticking out that kind of comes to him almost like a bottle nipple, which kind of makes it easy. He's gonna, when his cheek touches your chest, he's gonna open. He's gonna open for you, right? He's still gonna open. And by the way, if you're ever using a nipple shield or giving a bottle or anything like that, never shove the plastic in the baby's mouth. Always wait for the baby to open their mouth and then bring the baby to you, or put the bottle in once the baby has rooted, has done this, okay? Because when we start doing, I'm gonna use a Neosporin tube to be my bottle apparently, that when we start doing this to the baby, they lose the reflex to do that. And they need to do that to be able to breastfeed, okay? And they're born with that. So we can teach them otherwise. But, you know, one thing, if you're going from a nipple shield or a bottle and you want to go back and forth, you got to make sure the baby roots before you feed them so they don't lose that. But when you nurse him, right? So he starts to, when he opens his mouth, don't just sort of let him suck his way on, like really bring him all the way on so he feels his mouth is full of breast tissue, right? So you're going to be quick and you're going to be purposeful and you're going to kind of go, okay, you open, let's go for it, right? And if you hold your breast, what will happen is, you know, the nipple shield is usually very firm, right? But if you hold your breast, you're going to create this sort of like firm thing for him that's going to fill his mouth. And hopefully you can trick him in that way. Another tip that you could do, Allison, would be, Carly was talking about these breastfeeding groups, these breastfeeding clinics. Everybody who's in this, this webinar today, I'm going to send a follow-up email to you with a few resources for you. Are you in New York City, Allison?
Yes. Yep.
Fantastic. So they're all over the freaking place here. And so all you have to do, very simply, is take your newborn baby out and go to a breastfeeding clinic. Very simply. As easy as you thought it was going to be. Take your baby out and go to one of these clinics, and it'll be great because you'll be around other moms that have come to this clinic probably because they, you know, at this group, they probably also want some support. And I bet you that the lactation consultant there would see if she could get the baby to latch. I mean, you certainly could call a private IBCLC to come and spend a couple of hours with you at your home or see them in their office and really do some work. But I would say it kind of unfolds in one of three ways. One would be, you know, you keep trying and one day he does it, right? Mm-hmm. Two would be you have to kind of go to boot camp with your baby, right? We're not using the nipple shield. I'm going to keep comforting this baby. I'm going to bounce up and down on the ball. I'm going to shush him. I'm going to encourage him, and I'm going to convince him that he can do it, you know, and you might need to work with someone with that. Or three, you just keep trying, and eventually you get off the shield. Right? So what I would say in your particular case, Allison, is that because he's gaining so well and you have such a fantastic milk supply, your biggest problem is that you have this annoying piece of plastic that you have to deal with. Yeah, exactly. So I would say probably your worst case scenario here is that it's just going to take a lot longer than you had hoped for him to get rid of it. Okay. And in those cases, what I see is that people get rid of them and they ride off into the sunset happily ever after. Yeah.
And I just want to add too, sometimes it's hard to remember like all of the details when, you know, now that it's been a few months, but I focused a lot on doing that hold and getting the baby to always latch with a really wide mouth. So he was getting a really big, so I was showing him when you get a really wide mouth, you're going to get much better milk coming out. You're going to get a better suction rather than doing that glommy thing that hurts me. And so I was like hyper focused on that for a few days, right around that time that I ended up not using the shield. And that was also really helpful. So I think, you know, having another person to his eyes would be great.
Yeah, I think so too. And one more thing, just for the benefit of everybody in terms of how babies get milk out of breasts. This is, I think, important. And I want to say that, like, so here's my teaching breast. You guys can see it, right? So I'm just going to kind of go behind here. This is why it's so expensive. See? Okay. So, so you can sort of see like all the little red little grapes here, and these are the alveoli that make and store the milk, right? It's part of the glandular tissue that your body makes when you're pregnant. And by the way, you make more with every pregnancy. Okay, so and you can see that they're attached to the little white branches, which are the milk ducts, and they all kind of come to the nipple, and the nipple is where all of the milk is delivered. Kind of, it comes out in many places like a shower. Anybody who's pumping knows that their milk comes out of many places. It's very thrilling. Okay, so so here's the deal, is that when the baby just sucks on the nipple, they're just sort of sucking on the end of the straw, and they're not really working anything out, right? They're not really working the milk out of your body. Whereas if the baby sort of forms a teat with all of this breast tissue in their mouth, and they're working with their tongue and their jaw and they're sucking and everything, sort of like this, right? You see, what happens is they're sort of drawing the milk out from behind, right? Sort of like pushing the toothpaste out of the back of the toothpaste tube, right? Instead of out of the front. So you'll still get some out of the front, but it'll really come out if you push it out of the back. And that's really what happens if you have a baby with a tongue tie or something like that can't do a deep latch. The reason that Carly's baby wasn't opening his mouth is because he was so restricted in there. He was just trying to make up for it all the time and saying, okay, well, I got to work with what I have, and I can't really move that freely. So he couldn't make those big motions that he needed to. But a baby that is not tongue-tied will be able to do that. We can teach the baby to not open their mouths. And the way that we do that is by sticking things in their mouths when their mouths are not open. So they have a reflex to open their mouth, the rooting reflex, and that is, I always say babies have GBS in their faces. So if you put the baby's face, anybody who takes my class knows this is like the biggest teaching point that I make that day. If you put the baby's face on your body, anywhere on your body, when they brush against the nipple, they will turn their heads and open their mouth really, really wide. They're programmed to do that. And when they do, you bring the baby onto the breast. And so Carly, if you were waiting for that, you got to help him to get used to opening his mouth, which was great.
And I would take him off if it was a bad latch. I'd do it 5 times, 10 times if I had to.
Yeah, if he was doing this.
Or going like this and then going to this. I take him off till he kept doing the big latch.
Yeah, and they start to learn. Yeah. But Allison, I'll tell you, I never met anybody that couldn't get their baby off the nipple shield sooner or later. So I like your chances.
Okay, thank you. Any tips on keeping their mouths open wider? Because I have noticed that his mouth his latch has gotten narrower, like as time has gone by with the nipple shield. Like he did have a great wide latch before. Any tips on how to keep it open, or when you...
Carly, what'd you do?
You know what? This is going to sound stupid. I feel really stupid about this, but because I heard it in a breastfeeding class, I saw it in a book, and it just didn't click that you want to have the nipple should come like, you should point it at their nose, right? So that then when they glom on, they have to go up over it, and that makes them open really wide. And I'd heard that so many times, but it just didn't like click in my brain until I was like, I gotta get this baby off this nipple shield. How am I gonna do this? And so when I would bring him over, I would make it so that my nipple was at his nose. So he had to really like work really hard and open his mouth to get up to where my nipple was, because I was always putting it above his mouth. And then I would let him latch on. And then if he tightened up, I'd pull him off, and then I'd do it again.
Okay. I'm just going to share my screen with you guys for a minute. I have a little illustration here. And the way that I always teach this, you see how the baby is latching. It's when you latch with a nipple shield, the baby comes straight onto the shield, right? But when you latch a baby onto the breast, it's different because in order for them to make that sort of teat, right? Let me see if I can get the little pointy thingy. Okay, can't figure that out right now.
We can see your mouse though.
You can? Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm.
So you see this baby, imagine that this baby started up here with his cheek on her, right? And then he kind of moved down, right? And opened his mouth and did this and did what he's doing, okay? So then you see how she's holding her breast, so the nipple is really almost like flexed up to point at his nose, right? So she's almost doing, I don't know if you can see, she's doing this. Look, she's doing that almost, isn't she? Right? So she's doing that, and then she brings the baby, if this is the bottom lip, from here, and then the top is the last thing that happens. So the baby actually is going to be favoring the bottom of the nipple, of the areola, if you will. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. I might have over-explained that, but from this picture to this picture is a second. So just forget the middle pictures. You can't see what's happening in them. Basically, you have an open mouth and then you have a full mouth. That's really what the experience should be like, I think, for you. And if you have an open mouth and then you have a closed mouth that's on the nipple, you're going to know it right away. Just like, stick your finger in the baby's mouth and start again. And I would say now, Allison, one thing that you can do in preparation would be to always start the baby's cheek on your body, and then he comes down, he opens, and then you put him on the shield. So he knows he has to open in order to get fed.
Okay. Thank you. That's helpful.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Okay. Here we go. Kristen, can you use your mic? Are you here? I'm going to try and unmute you. Kristen, I can't seem to unmute you. Maybe because you can't use your mic. Well, Kristen, Kristen emailed me a question, and if you want to type, you can, and I'm going to see if I can see it very obviously in my email, but she had a bunch of questions as well, so I'll see if I can dig it out, or she can type to me. Does anybody else have any questions right now? Because I do have a little presentation I can make on breastfeeding if it's helpful for the pregnant people. Kristen's here. She's having computer troubles. No worries. You let us know when you're ready, okay? Any other questions right now?
A quick question.
Yeah.
When you said start with the baby touching your skin in order to start the rooting, so if we're doing, if she's in a cross cradle, let's say going to your left breast, what part of her cheek would be touching your skin?
I'm going to act it out for you. With
Great.
Dusty's here. She's going to help us. Okay. So I would take the baby and put the baby, like, you know what I mean? So just like, you know, on your chest, and then she'll start to look. She'll start to look, right? And then right? So you see how she's sort of towards the middle, right? Then she opens, I'm over exaggerating here, but then you would bring her on. Okay.
Okay. So she's starting
just like, what's that?
You're starting her a little bit above the breast?
Yeah, so she has all this skin time, right? It's like we're taking like that whole idea of uninterrupted skin to skin time that's so good for them when they're first learning to breastfeed, and just sort of shortening it and saying, oh yeah, you get a couple of seconds of skin so you can figure out where the nipple is. She'll figure it out. Remember, anything that touches their cheeks, they're going to turn their head and open their mouth toward it, especially if the baby is less than, say, 6 weeks old. They really still have that reflex. So Tatiana, if you notice that she's still, like, her mouth's not really open and she's only 4 weeks old, you can totally still fix this because her reflexes are still in there. She hasn't outgrown them yet. Okay. Okay, I have a question. Here it is. Okay, great. Okay. My baby is now 15 days old, and since she started getting the hang of nursing, oh, Sarah sent me Kristen's question. Since she started getting the hang of nursing on about day 4, she's been almost permanently attached to the breast. I'm not talking about 4 to 5 hour cluster feeds in the evening. I'm talking about 6 a.m. to 12 p.m., 2 p.m. to 8 p.m., and then 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. She will fall asleep with the breast, but as soon as I disconnect her, she wakes up and makes mouth movements like she's hungry, and she screams within 30 seconds if she's not put back on the breast. That's really key. It's not just that she's making the movements, it's that she's getting really upset. She's giving you a message that I can already tell, Kristen, that you're getting, okay? So I know it's not all active feeding. Okay, fair enough. I often don't hear swallowing while she's sucking, and I don't know if it's because she's not getting enough milk from me in general, because it's not physically possible for my body to keep up with her marathon sessions, or because she's just using me as a pacifier. Got it. Her diaper output is between 5 and 8 poop diapers and maybe 3 or so pees per day. She has gained back the weight she lost after birth, so I know she's not starving. But this feeding schedule feels totally unsustainable for me, and it's making me doubt my ability and inclination to continue breastfeeding. I mean, would anybody blame you? This sounds really, 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 really hard, Kristen. Okay. Is this a situation you see often? Can I expect the baby to taper off feeding so frequently soon? Any insight or suggestions for how to survive would be much appreciated. Okay. Okay, here's what I think. I'm glad that she's not starving, so that's really great. But what I think is happening here, especially if like she's just really screaming afterwards, I would definitely have your feeding assessed by somebody who can weigh the baby before and after feeding. So I'm not sure, Kristen, if you are in New York City or not. We have a lot of breastfeeding groups, and in the email follow-up that I'm going to send everybody tonight, I'm going to send you a link for how to find a local breastfeeding group here in New York City. La Leche League is great, but they're not going to have a lactation consultant with a scale there, and you really need a scale. So this is what I would suggest. I think that we need to know what she's doing while she's there, right? So it would be great if somebody could, you would go to the session, or you could also have an IBCLC come to your home. Just make sure it's somebody who brings a scale. Almost every lactation consultant brings a scale, okay? So that would be my recommendation. A breastfeeding group led by an IBCLC who has a scale, or somebody in an office or coming to your home that has a scale and will do what they call pre and post feeding weights. So why am I saying this? Because sometimes your pediatrician will have an IBCLC in the office, and the IBCLC is going to give you like general tips. Like they're not really going to do a full assessment. They're not really going to do pre and post weights. Okay. So that's really what you need. So you would go with the baby, or they would come to you with the baby hungry, and the baby would they would weigh the baby before. You would breastfeed the baby like you normally did, and they would weigh the baby after. So we already know she's not starving overall, but the question is she getting enough in a feeding that you can do comfort measures for her, and they can teach you some tips and tricks, or maybe whatever it is that you're going to do for her in between? Or is she a really, really slow feeder that is having trouble getting the milk out and is just feeding and feeding and feeding and feeding and feeding all day because it's just really, really slow? She's ultimately getting enough, but it might kill you, right? In which case, the lactation consultant is going to be able to give you some tips to see how you can improve the baby's ability to efficiently transfer the milk, okay? One of the things that would give you a break would probably be using a supplementer at the breast. If that's the case, it can make the baby suck more vigorously and can help them kind of grow into what they need to do. But there's no way I can say that without actually seeing what's going on, okay? So that's what I would say. I would say, to see someone and talk with them on the phone and say, I know that she's not starving, but what is happening now is not sustainable. I also think that 3 peas for a 15-day-old baby is not really enough. Maybe some of those peas are mixed in with the poos, and so you can't really tell that they're there. So I wonder if that's going on. But Kristen, I just wanted to say that I hear you. And I think that feeding 6 hours at a shot and then sleeping, and then 6 hours at a shot and then sleeping, and when she's not on the breast, she's screaming, That's not normal for a 15-day-old baby. And this can get better, and it will get better if you have the right support. I'm very happy to do a phone session with you. If you want, you can email me, or I can help point you in the right directions so somebody can see you in person. And I hope that this is helpful. But guys, I just wanted to say for anybody on the call that, you know, this is sort of a case where she might go to the pediatrician, they might weigh her baby and say, you're doing great, just keep breastfeeding the baby, right? But we all know, anybody who just heard what I just said can hear what's going on here. You know what I mean? Like it's definitely something is up. She knows something is up. So I just want to say, Kristen, I want to validate what you said. And I just wanted to say that, like, I really appreciate you bringing this up. And if you think something is going on, you're probably right. You're probably right. So, so just keep sort of knocking on doors until somebody gives you the help that you need. I totally understand. Just hang in there until you can get somebody to assess the situation and give you a plan to make it more livable and more sustainable. And you will get there. She's going to get better at this. She is, but get the support that you need so that way you can survive until she does. Okay. That's the big thing. If you think that you just have to try harder, like, you're already going 24/7. So you could use a little life raft right now. Okay. All right. So anybody, thanks Sarah for posting that. I hope you heard that, Kristen. You'll hear it in the replay if you don't. Any other questions, right? Oh, here I have a message. Hold on. She said, thank you so much for the answer. My pleasure. Absolutely. Any other questions right now that anybody has? I'm very happy to just continue doing Q's and A's.
Hi.
Hi, Alex.
Hi. Second question for me. I sent you a message, but I don't know if you received it. My partner, who's in the other room listening here, has a question about, he was wondering if there's something that partners can help with, what mothers found most useful when they were breastfeeding, or what they wish their partner had done to support them in what is obviously not the easiest situation sometimes.
It's a great question, Alex. Katie or Carly, one of you guys want to take that?
Sure. I'll just say from my side that I think sometimes it's like physical support. So as you're trying to latch, you know, sort of helping you, but more for me, it was my husband Sven would, you know, just get me water all the time, and you know, that kind of physical support, but it was also just kind of validating what I was doing. So it was like, you know, just sort of keeping the faith that this will get easier over time. And he was getting up with me in the night sometimes, particularly in the first couple of weeks, you know, and just a bit of moral support. I think, to be honest, that was worth as much as anything. And at times he did say to me, you know, you can use formula if you want to, but I think that was he kind of knows me, so he knew that by saying that I'd be like, no, I definitely want to breastfeed. Once, like, you know, there are options, but this is what I want to do. So I think that kind of moral support was absolutely key.
I'll just add same thing. I feel like every time I breastfeed, my husband knows that he's on errand duty. I'll be like, oh, can you give me some water? Oh, can you give me an apple? Oh, can you give me the remote? Or like, it's like, I'm always asking him to do stuff and he's always willing. So I think that that's wonderful. And when I was really having a hard time with latch and with supply and all of that stuff, sometimes I just needed a break. And so my husband was always willing. I just needed to ask him and he would take care of the baby. I made a rule for myself that I would try to pump within an hour of when my husband would feed him a bottle, just so my body would try to stay up on the need of the baby. But there were some times where I'd have a rough night and I just needed a nap. So my husband would take him for 3 hours, and if he was hungry or fussy, he'd give him a bottle and he'd just let me know like what he ate, and I would just sleep for like 3 hours, and it was beautiful and it was wonderful and it was so helpful. And I think it was actually special for him to be able to have that time alone with the baby. So that's that was really special for me.
I'll just add to Alex, a lot of people love it when their partners will do a lot of the other care of the baby, you know, besides breastfeeding, right? So diaper changes, burping the baby, you know, rocking the baby to sleep, going for a walk with it. Oh, I have to go to the store to get you some stuff. I'll take the baby with me, right? And then you're alone in your house with your shower and you can just see what happens. Or alone in your house with your bed. And and those kinds of things are really supportive. And I would say also for your partner, nobody talked about it here, but it's hard to describe what like exhaustion, nipple soreness, you know, bottom soreness or incision soreness, and then like the hormones on top of that, like everything is working against you in terms of like your ability to tolerate like a lot. So I would say like a box of tissues and a hug, and then if you say get away from me, that they do, you know, and they don't take it personally, especially in those first couple of weeks. You know, they say especially day 3 or 4, it's very common for people to just sort of cry, you know, and a lot of times whenever I go over to see people for lactation, they start crying when they're explaining to me what's happening, and they always say that they're sorry, and I'm just like, you know, I already had the tissues out. Like that's sort of my wheelhouse, is like people crying with their babies at their breasts. So it's very, very normal for that to happen, and to make sure that your partner knows that you might be emotional. It doesn't mean that you have postpartum depression. It's just like a little emotionally labile time. And I think being overly tired like doesn't help either. So just sort of like roll with the punches. You're going to make it through. If you haven't already watched our postpartum stories, there's another breastfeeding story in there, and she gives some great tips for how to cope with all of that postpartum emotional stuff, which is sort of impossible to leave out of this conversation. So that's another part of it as well.
I just wanted to chime in, just as a doula who sees a lot of people postpartum. One thing that I've seen that's really helpful is like when Tanya's talking about all the emotions, and Carly and Katie are talking about like the emotional and moral, the support, is like checking in with you to like see how you're actually doing with everything. Like if you're having trouble, and checking in and finding out like what's really important to you. So Tanya mentions it a lot. If you listen to the postpartum, I'm sure they talk about it, that there's so many different ways that mothers are being undermined. And so having someone who's like checking in with you to check in with you about all the messages you're hearing and that kind of thing, you know, I think is really helpful too. To be careful.
Like how Sven was telling Katie, like, okay, like, I'm going to limit your Googling, and like, you know, I mean, like, I'm sure he was very kind and gentle about it, but sometimes you need someone who really knows you to just sort of say, you know, you're kind of really looking and looking and looking, and like, maybe you could just kind of, whoo, you know, and sometimes you do need somebody that knows you really well, like your partner, to just sort of say, you know what, you're totally right. I'm really scattered about this. Thanks for helping me put a lid on that. Okay. Thanks, Sarah. You're the best. Sarah helps a lot of postpartum people. She's one of the doulas that I was talking about that does extra postnatal visits for almost everybody. So she's not really a postpartum doula per se, but she focuses a lot of her care in terms of completing the care and being that person who can sort of intervene after the birth. And, you know, I think Katie mentioned it and Carly mentioned it too, is that once you're discharged, I mean, it's interesting because Katie and Carly were both sort of in the hospital for 3 days, one way or another. Many people are in the hospital one day, you know? So once you go home, there's a lot of sort of selling in the hospital about, we have lactation support here, we offer lactation support, and that's totally great. But the truth is, once you go home, there's really, like, there's nothing in the system. It's really up to you to seek that out. So La Leche League, your friends, new mom support groups, IBCLCs, breastfeeding groups with scales. It sounds like a lot of you utilize a lot of these things as you discovered them. So there's no real set place for this. So if you have a birth doula who says, yeah, I'd like to come by and see what's going on with your lactation in case you need a referral, it's really nice to have somebody who will intervene for you in that way, because they're going to be the only people calling, quite honestly.
I just saw someone today on day 12 with no milk and she had nowhere else to call. A friend of hers used a friend of mine as a doula, and that's how we got connected. And like, I honestly don't know how much I did for her today, but she was like, I just didn't have anybody else. I didn't know where to go. So having someone that can check in on you and then refer you elsewhere is a great idea.
Wherever you're taking a childbirth class, if you're pregnant and you're taking a childbirth class, you know, or you're taking a breastfeeding class, like sort of see what those networks are there. If you already have a relationship in somewhere, certainly a lot of our Manhattan birth people kind of get, you know, spread around to us the best that we can. We don't have a big enough army to help everybody when they need it. We're working on it. But I think, you know, find out what those networks are. So you already have a list and you know some places that you can call, and you certainly can reach out to us via our website, even if you're not around here, you know, and we can help you find somebody. Okay. All right. So are there more questions? I kind of love this.
Tanya, sorry, it's Katie here. I had one question, which was sometimes at night, when I'm trying to get the latch right, he just is really impatient, because I guess he's been asleep, you know, he tends to sleep for quite long periods at night, and it's like he's super impatient and is just like clamping down, and like he's not gaping at all. So I don't know if any tips on that.
When you say night, you mean the middle of the night?
Yeah.
And what's your sleeping arrangement?
He is just next to me in a rock and play thing.
Okay, great.
We tried other stuff, but yeah, this is what we've settled on for now. Yeah,
that's fine. Yeah, I mean, please, girl, I'm not judging your sleeping arrangement. Yeah. So I'm glad he's close to you. Is my point. Because my first thought was, can you get to him a little bit sooner?
Okay, yeah.
So do you feel like by now, Katie, that you understand around what time he might wake up?
But it all depends on when he goes to bed, but yeah, I can judge like from that pretty much when he'll wake up. It's not like it's the same time every night, but it's the same length roughly.
And if he wakes in the middle of the night, are you sort of hoping he'll go back to sleep and waiting for a real commitment from him, or are you just picking
maybe a little, sometimes, because often he will go back for like another hour. He'll just chunter for a little bit and then he'll go back and then he'll properly wake up, but he's not screaming. He's just, you know, like he's grunting. That's basically what he does.
Oh yeah, the grunting. Oh my gosh, the grunting. Yeah. Yeah, Carly's laughing too. She knows what we mean. Yeah. Okay. So an experiment might be for you to pick him up in the grunting and feed him. Right. And then see what happens. Mm-hmm. Because I think, you know, he may be grunting and he might go back to sleep, which is awesome. But then when he wakes up the next time, he really wants to eat, and then he's chomping you. Mm-hmm. So I wonder if you get him a little sooner, then maybe he'll give you a nice stretch after that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah.
How long is it before he grunts?
So what you mean, how long does he grunt for when he wakes up? I guess he's grunt. It's really hard to tell because he does it sort of fairly frequently throughout the night, even when he's completely asleep. But when he's waking up, I guess he might do that for like 3 or 4 minutes.
But I mean, like, how long since he's last fed before he does this?
Oh, at night, we're talking like 5 hours.
Oh yeah, feed him.
Yeah.
He's hungry. Yeah, he's hungry. So I think feed him with the grunting. I mean, he's little enough that he's still 5. Yeah. So 5 hours, just for everybody who's here, 5 hours is considered through the night, if you believe that.
No, he doesn't feel it.
I know. They don't judge through the night the way that we did it in college, which was like a 14-hour sleep. So it's 5 hours is through the night. So I would say if he's waking, then you should go for it. He's only 8 weeks old. I think that you can do that. And I imagine that in the future that will stretch. But you haven't been to the 4-month sleep regression yet. So there's lots of fun coming your way. And it'll be okay. For the benefit of anybody listening, progress is never linear when it comes to a baby that's under a year old. So actually, I don't know. I think it might be linear with my 10-year-old. I'm not sure if it is yet still. So just to give you an idea. So that's what I would suggest. I hope that's helpful.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you.
Let me know what happens.
Yeah, will do.
We'll take more questions. This is fun. Allison with a 3-week-old baby. Hold on, I have to unmute you.
Oop.
Oh, I think I'm going to let you do it. Go ahead.
Hi.
Hi, Allison.
One other question. Should I attempt to do any sort of bottle feeding at night or avoid doing that until I get the nipple shield situation? I guess avoiding the nipple shields.
What kind of bottle are you thinking about doing? Like just introducing a bottle?
Yeah, so like my husband can do like a feed at night or something.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's lots of reasons that you might want your baby to take a bottle, right? I mean,
Right.
certainly so your husband could give the bottle, but also so that way the bottle is part of the baby's vocabulary, right? So that way, like, I don't know, if you want to do anything you want, you can do it. I mean, babies are easy, they're portable, and you can probably breastfeed in most places. But I don't know, I always just think that moms feel really secure when they know that their baby can take a bottle and they have proof, you know?
Okay.
So I think it's okay. What I would say is that you just want to be careful. I'm not sure what's his feeding like in the middle of the night. I mean, he's 3 weeks old, so not that there's so much of a pattern, but
He's doing a cluster feeds from like 9 to midnight, where he feeds almost like every hour and a half. And then I'll get some 3-hour stretches the rest of the evening, for the rest of the night.
So one thing that you could experiment, it sounds like you have plenty of milk.
Yeah.
Because he's just going to be all cheek soon enough. Okay. So that's great. So, oh my goodness. He's being so good on this call.
Yeah,
okay.
yes.
So thank you for that little pumpkin. So I would say, and by the way, this is like specifically advice for Allison. This is not a rule for everybody. Okay. So for somebody else that maybe doesn't have as good of a milk supply, I might suggest waiting a little bit longer. Okay. But I know that you've got the shield, but it's not really affecting your ability to make tons of milk for this kid, right? So what I would suggest that you do if you want to introduce a bottle would be at first, just to like in the morning when you feel like you have a lot of milk. We have the most milk in the morning. If you have a baby that you're breastfeeding, you probably already know that you wake up so full. But if you don't have a baby that you're breastfeeding, then you will learn it soon enough. So in the morning, I don't know, whatever time he wakes, 6, 7, whatever, breastfeed him. And then when he's done, go ahead and pump. Right? So morning time, like especially like, 8 in the morning, 10 in the morning, like most babies that cluster feed from 9 to midnight, the way that Allison's and kind of everybody's does in the world after 2 weeks of age, in the morning, they're like golden. They're like amazing, right? So because you have all of that milk and they get really full on it and they're doing the morning and it's real nice. So that's a great time for you to pump. And then you could have your husband or your partner, whoever you have that's around with you, introduce a bottle during that cluster feeding time in the evening. And actually that might be a nice time for you to get a little break. And I would suggest that you introduce a snack. Right? So like a half an ounce or an ounce, and you're still nearby and you would nurse the baby, right? So that's just like sort of as an introduction. So it's part of the baby's vocabulary. Now, that's sort of like the first introduction. And then like advanced placement would be like, if you're thinking you might want to sleep a little bit, right? So, because keeping in mind that if we don't feed the baby and we sleep instead, then our breasts are not being emptied and they get a very clear message to sort of slow down production, right? So for every person's supply in the world, that effect is going to be different. Some people have a lot of leeway and it's not going to really matter. And some people, it's like all the stars and the planets have to be aligned and they really need to empty their breasts very, 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 very regularly so that way they can have all the milk that they need. And that's because of just the differences in people's physiology. So what I would say for you, Allison, would be he's going to cluster feed in the evening. And I don't know what time he's done cluster feeding at midnight.
That's been the last 2 nights.
Yeah, we have about 6 minutes until he wakes up to cluster feed. Okay,
Yeah.
so so this pattern was different. So maybe when he's done with his cluster feeding, we have another name for this called the witching hour, which Katie already alluded to. Carly and Katie taught you everything. So they didn't teach you about mastitis. I can talk about that in a minute. But anyway, so what I would say is before you go to bed, pump. So just hyper empty your breasts. And then if, let's say he gives you a 4-hour stretch or a 3-hour stretch, let your husband give him a bottle that maybe you pumped that morning or whatever you just did at midnight, depending on how much is there. You might have to combine them a little bit, right? And then you sleep a little longer, okay? And then maybe you do the next feeding. And then after that feeding, also pump.
Okay.
Right? So you're going to hyper empty your breasts after that. And if that doesn't work, they get too full, you can always set your alarm, wake up early and pump, or you can wake up with your husband while he's giving the bottle and pump. I'd like it if you could just sort of sleep. Of course, he might give the bottle and then comfort the baby and put the baby back to bed, which takes some time, and you could just pump and go back to bed. But pumping is like you got to get up and hook it up and turn it on and the motor and all that. Not so easy.
And how long should I be pumping for during those sessions?
I would pump for 15 minutes, and I would use hands-on pumping, which means you're using your hands to make sure that you're getting all of the milk out. And I'm going to send you a very boring video about it.
Okay.
But it will teach you everything you need to know about it. So
Great.
When you're feeling really sleepy, watch that video.
I'll do that tonight.
Very good.
Thank you.
My pleasure. So just like on what Allison just said, for some people, sleeping more and pumping for the baby and this kind of thing is not going to be practical, and it's not going to work for them, right? It's going to be easier for them to just roll over and feed the baby, right? So I want to just really say that there's a lot that's been written about this. I just tend to not really believe in dogma anymore because I've known too many people. So I've just met too many new families that have shown me that they're doing it different and it's working. So I've learned over the years from them. So don't take anything that, is in a book as the end all be all. I mean, it is supply and demand, but some people are going to be able to have a lot more wiggle room than others, depending on their own physiology and their baby's ability to drain the breast effectively. Okay, other questions, guys? We have answered every breastfeeding question there is. That's so great. You guys, really quickly, I made a whole PowerPoint that we didn't have time to get through, but I just want to show you a couple of things, especially if you're pregnant or even if you have a new baby and you haven't had mastitis or thrush. I just want to show you what it is and what the symptoms are, so that way you'll know a little bit about it, okay? So let me just bring it up here. We've done so much about this. I'll just go some of these. I'll just start from, I hate to be like talking about problems, but you guys really did talk a lot about getting started. So just a couple of notes about that. When you're getting started breastfeeding, you definitely want, let me just, hold on a second. When you're getting started breastfeeding, you definitely want to do as much skin to skin as possible. When the baby has contact with your skin, that's how they're going to find the nipple. So a lot of people say, oh, just put the baby in front of the nipple. I say no. I say put the baby on your body and let the baby find it so they can open, okay? So sort of start that way in the beginning, and that's really going to be your ticket to having the baby be able to open their mouth and find things with their faces, okay? If you notice that you're putting your baby in front of the nipple and the baby's hands are getting in the way, the hands are in the way because the baby's face can't find it, they can't see it, they don't know where it is. Put the baby on your body like that, okay? And you can just move their hands out of the way, and then they will stay out of the way for the most part. But when they're just in front, That's when the baby's going to reach. Okay. So if you take them away, they'll use their appendages. So that's one terrific tip. And always keeping in mind that it's supply and demand. If you're in the hospital and there's an issue with the latch and your baby is not nursing, and guys, I just want to say this. A lot of times I call people and I say, is the baby nursing? And they go, well, I'm trying. And I go, I know that you are. Is the baby nursing? Well, we're trying. Guys, if the baby's not nursing, empty your breasts, right? Get on the pump and empty your breasts. You can try again. They're going to get it. The babies get better at it, but empty your breasts, because the longer you go without emptying your breasts, that sends this message to the brain to stop production. And we want to send the message to the brain that is, the baby is here, make the milk. Okay. So a lot of people that have these bumps in the road in the beginning and they don't get a hold of a pump, or their baby's not properly draining the breast, their supplies, they'll spend, Carly definitely spent some time catching up with her supply, which she did brilliantly, by the way, I should mention. Okay. So I just want to share part of my PowerPoint and then we'll end. Okay. So a little bit about sore nipples. I just wanted to say that your nipples may be sore, but not painful, right? So a sign of painful nipples would be looking at your baby with a dirty look when they want you to breastfeed them, right? Or looking at them like this. Oh no. Right. So those kinds of things means that probably her nipples are really, really painful. Whenever somebody tells me that they would rather go through natural labor again than have to breastfeed, then I know they're in a lot of pain with their nipples. Anybody who decides that they want to quit breastfeeding because of the pain, they're in a lot of pain. They need to see an IBCLC, not a pediatrician, not an OBGYN, not a midwife. They need to see a lactation consultant for a full visit where they're going to spend a couple of hours with them. Okay. So a good deep latch with a wide open mouth. We talked about that. Okay. Some tips would be like olive oil or coconut oil or lanolin, or soaking them in salty water for 5 minutes 3 times a day. Okay. And we talked about getting an IBCLC. Another thing that was mentioned, I think Allison was saying that she started using a nipple shield when she became engorged. So in case you don't know what that is, that's on day 3 when your mature milk comes in. Your breasts may become swollen and inflamed. It's not really too much milk. So you've got a whole lot of soreness going on, and your breasts may be swollen like this particular person's. Okay, you can see all the veining in her, right? This is a very swollen situation here. Okay, so some tips for engorgement would be cabbage leaves, also frequent nursing. If the areola becomes where's my boob? If the areola becomes too firm that the baby can't latch because they're engorged, what you need to do is soften that part so the baby can make the teat. So they can't latch onto a rock, right? So you have to soften that. So hand expression, right? Warm compresses to kind of get some of the milk out, and even pumping an ounce or 2 would be fine to just sort of soften it. You can also ask about ibuprofen. That can help to bring down swelling, and it resolves itself in 3 to 5 days. Guys, just a word on cracked nipples. So cracked or bleeding nipples need to be addressed. Okay, you don't just have to tough it out. You need to fix the latch or figure out what's going on in the baby's mouth that might be causing this. So a tongue tie is a classic thing that will cause very painful cracked nipples and bleeding nipples, or the baby won't latch altogether. I mean, that's another thing that can happen with tongue tie very frequently. Okay, please don't expect that the people in the hospital are going to be able to diagnose your baby's tongue tie. They might, but they totally might not. And if you suspect that the baby has some kind of restriction in their mouth, no matter what you do, you can't figure it out, make sure that you see an IBCLC that spends time with you and gives you good follow-up, okay? Because if you have cracked nipples that don't get treated, in about 2 weeks, they can become mastitis, okay? So a fever in the postpartum period is never normal. Mastitis feels like the flu. You feel just systematically sick, okay? So take a look at your breasts in the mirror, look for redness in a hot spot, call your midwife or doctor and be persistent, because I don't know if you guys have heard, but nobody takes care of you when you go home. So you got to call them. Don't wait for your 6-week appointment. You need to treat this. It's really, really important. And that's kind of one example of what it looks like. Can you see? You see the mastitis? I know, Katie's making a face, right? So if she had a fever and then she looked in the mirror, she might see this, right? Sometimes it's underneath your breast and you don't realize that it's there, right? Here's another example of somebody's mastitis underneath, right? That you could kind of see, all right? So there are various holistic measures that you can do to treat this, but also antibiotics are appropriate if your holistic measures have not worked in 24 hours, because these things can actually get worse. And I don't even want to scare you, but just get it taken care of, okay? I also wanted to mention thrush. I knew nobody today was going to talk about it, but you might have heard about it. It's generally characterized, this is a yeast infection on your nipples, okay? So it's characterized by burning or shooting pain, and the symptoms get worse the more you nurse or the more you pump. So for a general shallow latch that gives you sore nipples, somebody will latch the baby, they'll say, ow, 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 but after about 30 seconds, they'll be fine and they can complete the feeding, right? When somebody has thrush, the pain gets worse as they go. The more their nipples are used, the more it hurts, okay? It might be itchy or shiny or white. Sometimes you can see the thrush in the baby's mouth, and they also might have a persistent diaper rash. I did spare you from the diaper rash pictures, but I did show you, this is kind of what it looks like in the baby's mouth. And for any of you guys who have babies, you can see that that is different from a milk-coated tongue, isn't it? It's kind of curdly, kind of cottage cheesy. Sometimes it's an in their cheeks, right? So you can kind of look in there, right? That's one place that you would see it. And this is what it looks like on your nipple, right? So look, if you see a white thing on your nipple, don't be like, I have thrush. I mean, it has to come with the other symptoms, right? So you can see how it can be kind of sneaky on your nipples. It can be hard to see, but if you have the pain and the shooting and you feel like you want to quit nursing, have somebody look at your nipples. So thrush is very pesky. You need to be treated, and so does your baby, okay? Oh, we talked about introducing a bottle. Oh, I made it through it. Fantastic. Okay, great. So I'm going to stop my share. So some closing words. Oh, wait, do I have another? No, I don't have any other questions. I will gladly take them. I know we're late, but I'm here. Maybe you have a burning question. Allison went to go cluster feed her baby. No, she didn't. She's still here. Okay, so I'll give you some parting words. So breastfeeding involves two individual people, and one of them hasn't read any of the books and is learning as you're both learning as you go, right? And there's a lot that we can read from the books about like the general rules about how this all works, and that's all really valuable. I love it when people read the first 100 pages of The Womanly Art of Breastfeeding, which is put out by La Leche League. I think it's a great resource, and learning all that you can. But then you kind of have to go with the flow, right? And just kind of keep at it, keep at it, keep at it. If you're crying thinking about breastfeeding, pumping to avoid breastfeeding, or your baby won't latch, you need to see a lactation consultant. Be persistent in the hospital. And then sometimes when they come, they spend a lot of time with you, but many times they don't. So just really make sure that you've got that community-based team. You have an idea, you have a list of lactation consultants and maybe a birth doula or a postpartum doula, people in the community that are going to do, as Sarah says, fill in the cracks like water, because there are so many cracks in the system. So we can't depend on them, okay? You certainly can reach out to us for resources. We're very happy to be here for you. But I think the moral of the story is everybody's different. And it's okay. And I just want to just say one more thing is that there's enough mommy shaming like to last the rest of eternity that's kind of going around on the internet right now. And we absolutely don't participate at Manhattan Birth. We meet you where you are at and treat you with love and acceptance, and try to help you get to the next step wherever that could be for you. So find who those people are in your community and definitely get a hold of them, because you're going to need it. Unfortunately, our moms usually don't remember what this was like. So anyway, I hope this is helpful for you. I had a lot of fun. Sarah, we should do another breastfeeding night, right? This was so cool. Yeah, I really like it. So if you liked what you heard tonight, please share it, point people to our video. You're going to get an email about where it's going to live on YouTube. And our next webinar is going to be June 12th on high risk pregnancy and birth. So excited. Hot topic. Nobody ever covers it. It's going to be great. So we will see you then. See you soon, guys. Have a great night.